The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everybody, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, and today is Thursday, April 11th, 2024. We're back for our weekly update. How are you today, Dane?
Doing pretty good, been pretty busy. You know, it feels like we've been saying this a lot, but trying to keep dry. It's been pretty wet the last few months and the last week.
Yeah, really, since last week we were saying the same thing. Yeah, it's just we're back at it again this week for sure.
Yeah.
And wet up here, wet on the volcano. Yeah, good time to do some inside work.
Right.
But it's been another week. Kilauea has been taking another step in its recharging here. Overall, pretty quiet still. Mauna Loa is even quieter. But we will cover the signals as usual. We'll talk about Tsunami Awareness Month a little bit, which it still is here in April. And then we have a special bonus with a edited down summary of the Southwest Rift of Kilauea history presentation for Volcano Awareness Month in January this year. So that's what's on our menu today. We'll give you guys an update on our final counts for our donation drive that we just are wrapping up here. And otherwise, what do you think, Dane?
Yeah. If you guys got any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will be doing a segment of question and answer in the middle for the update and anything that's happening currently, and then we can answer more historic questions at the end.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And I will add, I think you guys who watched our very lengthy update last week in 1868, We'll do a very much shorter, brief recap of just the sequence of events of what happened then, just to have it in a shorter format here, so we can all be able to refer to that in the future, right? Just the events that happened without going into all the details and all the quotes and all of that. That's all in last week's stream if you missed that. If it's too much, then yeah, catch our summary and we'll roll it in here as well.
Okay.
So, all right, let's rearrange our screen here and get ready for our Hawaiian volcano summary. All right, in our Hawaiian volcano summary this week, Kilauea is still recharging, and this past week is showing more earthquakes in the South Caldera area, a little bit down where it joins the Kauai fault zone right through here, but not as many earthquakes further down the rift, the Southwest Rift, than that as were occurring previously. There are still a few of these slightly deeper earthquakes under the caldera. These earthquakes are colored by depth here. And this is the last week, and ongoing still South Pahala deep earthquakes, South Flank earthquakes, as has been usual in the past few weeks here. So still recharging, a little bit more earthquakes in the last few days, in particular yesterday, but we'll come to that here in a second. First, let's recap the Sandhill tilt meter, which you can see here for the last 3 weeks has been on a accelerated inflationary trend. It was inflating before that, just at a much slower rate. If we look just the last week or so, we've come up perhaps 15 microradians or so, which is a pretty good amount. And over the last 3 weeks, or even the last month, we've come up almost 35 microradians or so. So a good amount of ground tilting happening in that South Caldera area to accompany the earthquakes. And earthquake counts have been cycling higher and lower. So yesterday we exceeded 100 earthquakes per day across the entire Kilauea volcano, which is about the same as we saw in our previous cycle peak back on March 31st, where it reached those levels as well. But it's not nearly as high as what we saw back in late January, early February as the intrusion moved down the Southwest Rift. So until these earthquakes are sustained at higher levels, then we are not taking the next step towards erupting at Kilauea or perhaps intruding into a different part of the volcano underground. This rightmost bar is the current daily count, so it is coming up higher than the previous times, and so we'll see if these earthquake rates sustain for more than 1 or 2 days here, or if they drop off again and continue to recharge in cycles. On Mauna Loa, this is the last month of earthquakes around the summit area. These are also colored by depth. So very few earthquakes overall. They're all quite small as well. And deep ones under the area, they've been occurring over the past several months. And the shallow ones all across, essentially marking the background activity in this area. And that's the Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. So we'll move on to our volcanic hazard summary. Let's get that up here. And it is the main hazard to people now is the volcanic gases. So this is the chart for the national park showing SO2 and particulate matter 2.5 all in the greens across the history shown on the graphs here. In map version, everything is in the green up there, as you can see as well. So not much to check in on there. It's still pretty low values, 60 tons per day is being reported by the USGS. But that's was back on March 27th. And if you're in nearby areas and the wind is blowing the wrong way, then maybe it'll come and get you. Otherwise, the rain that we're talking about being so persistent in recent weeks has been keeping the air fairly clean of the gas as well. So not as much hazard for visitors and nearby residents. So we'll move on to observations, of which we also don't have a whole lot of, but I can give you a view into the live webcam here, and see the camera's got some water drops in the lens here in front, but still steaming in the background. I can maybe rewind it to some time where it wasn't quite as blurry, but let's see if there even is a moment in time back here, there, earlier this morning, where you can see all the gas coming out and the mineral accumulation on that crusted crater floor. The magma is still a mush underneath all this stuff at some thickness down and continues degassing, and you see it billowing away here from the edges of the central plug and the perimeter of the lake as well. So that's our live look in Kilauea today. We'll move on to earthquakes, and recent earthquakes colored by depth once again. This is the last 2 days from the USGS website, showing that really the pattern is much more clearer when we zoom into the more recent activity. We're very concentrated in the South Caldera area, a little bit outside, but not much beyond in the last few days. All the earthquakes happening further down southwest of there are all deeper, as colored by the deep blue for Pahala here. It matches the Pahala group further over here. So that's the last 2 days. Let me come up and let's filter it and pull it to the last 2 weeks. And we can come down and see a little bit more filled in the difference from before. So before we were getting more of these earthquakes down in this junction of the Kilauea fault zone and the Southwest Rift Connector. Whereas in the last couple of days, they're more so in the South Caldera area. That's where the quaking has been happening. So we look at the national USGS page, and we can list our earthquakes and sort them by magnitude here. So within the last week, the largest one was a 2.6 right there in that South Caldera area. There was also, this looks like it's been revised down to 2.1. Earlier, some of these were showing up as 2.3, but 1.9 as well there. So not huge magnitudes, right? The earthquakes are starting to pick up in numbers and intensity a little bit, but it's just the baby step towards what we expect to see, or to renew its intrusion or move towards an eruption in that area. So what's curious is that we've seen that transition happen as quickly as a couple hours in the past, but it had a lot more buildup ahead of time, which we haven't seen yet in this go around. So those are the earthquakes that we can share this week. And with that, we will move on to our monitoring signals, which also include more earthquakes, but let's start at the top here with our tilt for the last week at Evacuation. So a mixed week here. The first part of the week was fairly flat, and then coming up over the last few days here. And that's coincident if we look at the earthquake rates here with that peak of earthquakes that was happening yesterday and continuing to some degree today still, right through there. With depth versus time, you can see that these are all in a shallow region. This little cluster of earthquakes coming in at shallow regions over the last few days here, whereas Deep Pahala is not showing anything unusual. You can see the earlier pulses of seismicity, then a gap, and then a little bit of activity, more gap, and then here renewed pulses coming again in the last couple of days. There's our map as we described earlier, right? Same pattern. And in cross section, I can point out here, we were tracking this last week, where these deeper yellow colored earthquakes sit beneath that summit region of the volcano, with all the activity happening up through here. So this is still the feeder zone. I know on this image it looks really close, but when we look at the scale here, that's 10 kilometers. It's 6 miles or so, something like that. So it's a long way down underneath that magma activity area. Yeah, the shallower storage zone that's feeding the rift zones. That's all here in this upper part of the 10K. All right, and there's a Deep Pahala earthquakes off to the side in case that's something you have not seen previously too. Excuse me. So looking at the last month now at Uekahuna, that little first part of the week where it was fairly flat is just a little blip in an overall larger pattern of inflation. Well, that goes back to about 3 weeks ago. And this is looking to the southeast from Uekahuna. Whereas Sand Hill looking to the northeast, we see inflation as well, but not nearly to that same magnitude. And it's really that southeast direction towards the South Caldera, and that's really showing this massive increase in tilt, right? So minus 14 to plus 22, that's maybe even 37 microradians total gain here within the last month, and it was almost 40. So pretty significant there. Well, that piece of land is hard to really convey, like how much it's been just undulating right over the last few years, rising up and collapsing down 2018, rising back up, refilling, sagging with intrusion. Now it's refilling, it's doing a whole undulation over time there. So, but currently rising back up pretty quick. All right, deficit time for the last month looks like that. It's a little less obvious where these gaps are, but you can see that there's been fairly consistent activity on that time scale in the shallow region and in the deep hollow region as well, right, with a couple of little clusters moving deep that we haven't seen as much recently. The last month across all of Kilauea, here we are, slightly over 100. There was that last peak at the 31st. The one that was back about a month ago was around 80. And you can see that maybe over the last week or so, our average might be somewhere in this 50 range, somewhere in there like that, right? So from about 50 background, we've jumped to 100. And now the question is, can we maintain it? And if so, how long can we maintain it? And then will we see larger events and even higher rates, or will it back off again? Right? And once it doesn't, then we'll know we're getting closer to the next change. Over the last year, there is that end of January week where there were over 3,000 earthquakes that one week. So in comparison, we're still down in the hundreds here, a few hundred. We're not even a 500. So it's a lot less. We're still really recharging towards that, right? And you can see really the zone that's relevant is from October on, when that intrusion began right through here. This was that kind of background rate before it was getting ready to do its big pulse, which came eventually here. So even though we're building back up and we're seeing the quakes clustering, we're not nearly to these levels as we saw back here. Still a little more ways to go. And over the last 5 years, our graph now turns to earthquakes per month. So we saw that we had a lower March in that recovery. And then here we are in April, getting a nice healthy start to it. And we'll see how much further it looks like we'll surely exceed March at this rate and start recovering back up towards these other earlier values. And so we'll see how far and how quickly we come. For GPS, this is a pattern for the last year at the summit. If we zoom into the very, very rightmost part of the graph, there's a little bit of missing data right there. So it looks like there's still some data updating issues on the website. Usually the data is coming in and it's being collected. And it's usually a transmission issue, or it's a transmission issue to the website. There's various ways that the data is going to propagate across that entire system. And when we have this much rain, it's not unusual to have those kind of things pop up, right? So we see it here. It's a little bit in the 2-year GPS as well, but overall the pattern looks like it's been fairly similar. We can't really say much about the last week here. If we go to the last 2 weeks, it's similar patterns as well. It looks like there's a little less noise in the data. There are some areas where there's still quite a bit of scatter coming through. So we'll have to wait as well to see what the GPS shows there. But it looks like the pattern is basically the same as before, just still filling and just a little bit fuller this week than last week, leading to slightly more earthquakes. So looking at the USGS notice for this week, released a couple of days ago on Tuesday, it's pretty much the same report. The volcano is not erupting. The level of seismicity continues between the summit and southwest rift. All rates of ground formation remain low. Everything is as we just summarized here. The one thing that's a little different, they still say that rates of deformation are low, whereas I'm emphasizing that the tote meters are showing more than small changes, are showing a good amount of accumulation of ground tilt there. But it's not really that significant unless it's happening together with earthquakes and with other signals like visible through satellite. We'll get a new satellite image next week, and we'll come back to that as well. So the rift zone, the east rift zone, is still looking quiet and no activity noticed there. So that's to comfort those who are down in the lower east rift. There's still no sign of anything coming that way. So, all right, that's the monitoring signals there. I thought I could throw in a little bit extra in here today, and I thought I'd pull back this paper from John Dvorak and Daniel Zurzin back from 1993 in JGR, Variations in Magma Supply Rate at Kilauea Volcano. And so they go through and did an analysis of all the magma coming in up through that time, 1993. And I just want to show you a couple of summary images here that we've shown this before, but this is how they show this graph. They have an arrow for how much is coming in magma supply, how much stays in the summit. To the left on this map here would be the southwest rift zone. Anything in this area here is all underground, stored underground, and then everything up here isn't actually moved to the surface in eruption. What's actually happening, right? So what these guys did is they went through all these different periods of time and said, okay, in 1960, the magma came in to the summit. It actually went all the way down the east rift zone to Kapoho, erupted out of Kapoho a huge amount stayed stored in the rift zone. The summit ended up more depressed than before. And these are in millions of cubic meters here. Right, so different eras, you can see less southwest rift action, nothing happening here, or here, but some other times in between there is. In 74, there is that injection in the southwest rift. In that case, it was 90 million, in 71 and 74, 90 million cubic meters believed to remain in the rift, and only 10 made it out of the rift there, right? So that's something to point out. That's like a 90% of the magma going down a southwest rift, even when it was erupted, stayed underground, and only 10% was able to come out from that. So there's some other eras in here as well. Here the Pu'o era begins, so you start seeing everything's going out the East Rift, and it's largely remained like that until 2018, and this hasn't been updated since. But the summary shot, if we sum all those eras all together, 1960 to 89, all through here, right now it's percentage of what's coming through. So 100% is coming in of what's coming in, right? Through that entire time, the summit lost 21% of its volume, with 5% erupted at the summit. Of that, 10% of that volume goes down the southwest rift. And of that 10%, 10% of that, or 1% in total, actually makes it to the surface as eruptions. So very little magma ultimately ends up coming out of the southwest rift zone. So southwest rift, summit, this is the upper east rift zone. This is the middle east rift zone. And this is the lower east rift zone. So lower east rift zone comes in higher than the southwest rift zone, but still pretty low at 5% of this period of time, right? Now, this does include from 83 onwards the era of Pu'o, where everything was coming out of Pu'o that way, right? So it might be slightly skewed in that regard. But still, I think it's useful to see that even when it does come in an era where there are two eruptions in the southwest rift, it's still only coming in right there at 10% of the volume making it to the surface. So as we imagine, like what's happening down in the southwest rift and magma coming in, it's adjusting and refilling and adjusting. What you can see overall is that it's normal for most of the magma to actually remain underground, right? Unless you have an open pipeline to Pu'o, and where it can keep pouring out for decades. So that's a little bit extra to monitoring, how this might fit into the bigger context and pictures there. Before we wrap up with Mauna Loa on our first monitoring segment here. So here are our maps for the last week, last month, and last year. Pretty quiet there, as we showed in our summary. So zooming in for last 5 years, here we are. Very, very quiet, but let's zoom into the last year. So a little bit higher than a couple weeks before that, but still lower than that pulse in late October, early November. And then coming into the last month, yeah, still a few more earthquakes happening over the last week than previous weeks, but it's only because there were so few, almost none, that now we're probably averaging 3 a day for the last week or so. It's still very low values. And there they are. They're happening recently in the shallower regions. Earlier in the month, it was a little deeper. Our tilt is still wobbling a little bit. Very small values here. If you look at the scale on the left, we're looking at half a microradian between these hash marks. So yeah, we'll see what of this becomes significant in the longer term. Mauna Loa is harder to interpret the tilt signal there. And then we have the complication now that it's leaning on Kilauea's southwest rift, which has been doing all this moving and adjusting itself. So there could be a domino effect where it propagates to Mauna Loa, as we see that those flanks are intimately connected, as was shown in 1868, if you joined us last week, or if you catch our summary in a little bit here coming up. So that is Mauna Loa here. And with that, we will move on to our Volcano Watch article for the week. And this is an interesting one, describing how HVO and their collaborators continue seismic surveys across active volcanoes in Hawaii. Or, in plainer language, they're taking all the seismic nodes that they previously deployed in Pahala and Kilauea Summit, and they are now deploying them over this next summer field season over Kilauea's East Rift Zone and Mauna Loa Summit and Upper Rift Zones as well. So that is the plan. And that means that we'll have even better resolution of the subsurface structure of these areas. As more sensors basically means you get a higher resolution image of what's happening underground. So that'll be cool. It's great to see so much science and push being made to understand these volcanoes better. It's pretty amazing that even with all this work done so far, this is one of the best studied volcanoes in the entire world. There's still quite a lot we don't know, right? So that's Volcano Watch this week. We'll now turn to Tsunami Awareness Month, and I'll show you a few things on this. First of all, in Hawaii, April Tsunami Awareness Month. I believe it's not like a standing thing, but it pretty much happens every April. Whether it gets recognized or not officially, it's something we'll keep pushing. And I thought one thing we could review is on Hawaii Island, what tsunamis have happened in April. Why April? And this is the why April. It's because of these big events. April 1st, 1946, I have them by just calendar day here, but there was a 7.4 in Alaska. So the tsunami, maybe revised 8.6 for the calculations. I'm not sure what that note is there, but in Pulalu, there was 17-meter run-up, right? That's 17 yards, what, 60 feet or so. Hilo was hit pretty hard. 173 people dead, 488 buildings destroyed. In 1946, $26 million in damage there. So we had April 2nd, 1868, the 7.9 that we discussed as well, had a tsunami that caused, these deaths listed are 81, but that's probably combines some of the earthquake and tsunami, and that's just part of the uncertainty of that time. Over 100 houses destroyed, 60-foot run-up at Keoho, 50 feet at Keoho, right? And then April 4th, a couple of days later, lesser noted, but also magnitude 7 on Kilauea south flank and tsunami noted in Hilo there. April 6th, not as big a deal, but 1943, 7.9 in Chile, sometimes just a little bit of run up, 10 centimeters on Oahu run up in that case in 43. April 9th, 1919, no one actually recorded an earthquake, but it's thought there was some ocean disturbance, submarine offshore of Kona side, maybe some submarine landslide. They reported having waves of 4.3 meters on that day. So it might have been some locally generated tsunami from underwater landslide is one speculation there. So April 12th, 2 meters on the Kona coast, 1819, and Jagger had some follow-up measurement of this. 1923, April 13th, 7.2 in Kamchatka, 30 centimeters in Hilo, not too bad there, but still something you wouldn't know until it actually hit, how bad it might be. In 55, April 20th, magnitude 7 in Chile, another 10 centimeter run up in Hilo. April 30th, 1919, 8.3 in Tonga, and 4.2 meters run up at Punalu'u is pretty significant as well. I threw in one other one that was our other significant tsunami we have had here on Hawaii Island that was actually in May, but that's in 1961, was May 22nd and 23rd from a 9.5 in Chile with 61 deaths in Hilo, over 500 buildings destroyed, 10-meter run up. So that's, you see, there's other tsunami in other months as well, but our most impactful ones in 46 and 1868 were in April and not too far off with the one in May in 1960 there. So what do you do about tsunami? Since we're trying to promote tsunami awareness, there are two kinds of signs: official warnings on the one side, right? If an earthquake is happening far away, like in Chile or Alaska or in Tonga, then it'll be time for there to be wireless alerts, TV alerts, telephone notifications, text messages, radio, and sirens, right? And what you want to do is get uphill, right? We'll see the map of how far that is. Usually it's only a few blocks inland, most places on this island, unless you're in a big valley or in one of the beaches. But if the earthquake happens locally nearby, like something in Kau, for example, or south flank of Kilauea, there may not be time for the sirens to get rung here to make effect here on this island. They'll ring them for Oahu where they have more time, but the estimate is within 15 minutes you might see waves affecting the entire island of Hawaii from a locally generated tsunami. So if you feel a strong or long earthquake, right, and you're next to the water, the advice I was always given was if the earthquake is strong enough that you're having trouble standing, that's about that threshold of 6.5 to 7. That's tsunami-genic. That will actually generate tsunamis, and anything that's smaller than that usually does not. Right. So especially if you're by the water, you feel a strong or long earthquake, you see a sudden rise or fall of the ocean, hear a loud roar from the ocean. Those are your natural warning signs that nature has given you there. That's when you self-evacuate and land uphill as quickly as possible, right? I think one of the reports from 1868 said that the first wave that came into Punaluu might have been 20 or 30 feet. Then maybe 10 or 12 feet. And then the water receded out to where they had 18 feet of depth exposed. And then it came back in at 40 to 50 or 60 feet after that. So, and something like 8 different waves are kind of there. Some other places they say they had 13 waves. It's hard to know exactly, but lots of them in series there. Right. So maybe you see it rise a little bit. If you see it fall a lot, that's, also get out of there and get uphill and inland as quickly as you can.
So do not go out there and try and pick up the fish. That's the last thing you try and do in that circumstance, and it has happened.
Yeah, there's usually a moment of like, what's that? Oh, it's a curiosity before you have to realize, oh, it's time to move, right? Drop everything and move. So, but yeah, there are various kinds of tsunami alerts. Usually what we get here in Hawaii is you start off with one of these two. Something happens and it's going to have no effect. You get an information statement. No impact expected. Sometimes we'll be on a watch where we're not sure yet if something's going to happen, but we'll be watching the buoys as an earthquake moves across the ocean and see what other places it might impact first. And then they might upgrade it to an advisory or to a warning, or they might then just put an information statement and say no further threat, right? Obviously, if something's happening and it's a warning, then you want to be very serious about that. The tsunami is imminent. If this is advisory, stay out of the water, away from the shore. If it's a watch, you're just preparing, you're monitoring all the information streams, local TV, radio, social media, NOAA, weather radio, all of that stuff. The county has had various tsunami awareness drives in the past, so I'll pull one up from a few years ago here. And here's what they recommend: 3-week plan of what to do during Tsunami Awareness Month. Week 1, understand the alerts. So hopefully you guys understand now. I showed you guys what the alerts mean, the different levels right there. Find yourself an evacuation map. Something else you could do. I'll maybe show you the map here in a minute, but just to keep it thorough. Next would be identify a safe place to evacuate, somewhere inland, right? So maybe you have someone in a family who's got a house that's a little further inland than everyone else, or something like that. And then you want to share and compare a plan with your friends and family as well. Right? So this is all part of the Via Halana blog from the county. Right, there's a little bit more detail here. Plan to safely evacuate when a tsunami warning is issued. The most important thing during a tsunami warning is to get out of evacuation zone as soon as possible. Anywhere outside evacuation zone is a safe place. If possible, make plans to evacuate a family member or friend's home who lives outside the evacuation zone. During tsunami warning, car traffic may be heavy and cause delays, so plan to walk to a safe location if possible. Right, that's your planning part, right? So mostly, especially if you're like at the beach, those are areas that you want to have plans of what to do and where to regather and all of that. And finally, and I'll end it last week, work with family and friends to plan and prepare for some event. If you're not located in a zone when a warning is issued, stay off the road. We want to keep roads and highways open for evacuees leaving the coastline and prepare emergency access to first responders who will be assisting with evacuation. Designate a person who is not in an evacuation zone to be the contact person to reach out to following an event. Tsunami events have no season like hurricanes. It can occur any time of the day or night, any time of the year. So this is one of the ones we want to make sure we only talk about it extra here in April, but it's an all the time, every day and every night thing. And we've been lucky to not have seen one in a while. That's been impactful, but it will come again, and hopefully we'll be prepared. So that is the county page here. Let me show you the top of this thing here and where all this comes from. Waihalana, about floodplain management and flood insurance here from Hawaii County. So NOAA has a tsunami evacuation map. Here it is for Hawaii Island. If you'll look, you see this ribbon of this reddish color around some parts of the coastline here. If we bring up the legend, that's just regular tsunami evacuation zone. We don't really have anywhere marked extreme zone or anywhere marked safe zone on our island. I'll zoom in and I'll start off by just showing you here. South of Kilauea, the national park, right? We do have some tall cliffs here at Halape, but we know that inundation occurs all the way to Halape, in fact, right? This is a place where there was the Boy Scout troop camp, got hit by the tsunami in 75 with 2 fatalities. This should be colored red here as well, so this map is incomplete as present, as you can see. Maybe through here is not so much danger because you can't really be by the ocean side there at low elevation, but all the way across here, down the coast of Kau, some cliffs, but also there should be more warning ribbon through here as well. The zones that are marked extra are the ones that you would expect. Your Punalu'u, right? So zooming in Punalu'u, if you're wondering where would you have to go, you'd have to make it back up to that middle part of that golf course, more or less, out of the tsunami inundation zone right there, or up the big hill that's right behind the campground zone right through there, right, where the Hokuloa Church marker is on the map here. Right, so otherwise you expect, a much narrower zone here along the coastline, but still something through here and get down to Whittington, Honuapu. And there you can see it goes further inland as well because of that flat land right through there and the high cliffs on this side that maybe will help funnel some water in there perhaps. But once again, once you get past this cliff zone right through here, then there should be some more tsunami inundation down through here should be present. All through here, down through here is Ka'alu Bay. That was an old port. People died in 1868 in tsunami there as well. So that should be marked red as well. And Green Sand Beach through here. I don't see anything marked there at Mahana Bay. Right, I think we're missing part of the map here. Right, nothing marked until you get back down to South Quinn. You can see where someone just drew a line, and that's where the project ended at that point in time, or an update to the map here. But otherwise, it's worth looking at, right? And we're talking about it's not very thick, this zone. A few blocks inland, and you're uphill far enough with the slopes of our island across all of Kona, right? Ho'okina, Honaunau, Kealakekua. If you're curious, in Kealakekua, not Pu'opo'o, right? That whole oceanside road is an inundation, but once you start getting up the hill, then you're in a clear. That's where you'd have to go. But down there on across the bay, that entire lowland is in the inundation zone. And I'll keep moving it up there. Just to have an idea of what it looks like all across here. Looking at Kailua Kona. That's the old airport, right? So all of the Nelha facility, the deep water down there is in an inundation zone. And okay, here's Kailua Bay. And old Kona Airport is all in that inundation zone as well. And up to Kuakini Highway on the Kona side here is where it's marked. Right? To give you some idea of what we're talking about for different places, depending on where you are, you hopefully can recognize one of these places. Right? So a lot of it's pretty generic, right? You see there's very straight line shapes coming across here. Some areas like Waikoloa mapped a little bit in more detail right through there. You can see much of Waikoloa Bay, or the beach, A Bay area, is in that inundation zone. Puako Bay up through here, but Kavaihai, I'm going to zoom it out a little bit, come up and around. It's pretty skinny all the way around. And then you start seeing some interesting things coming to here, right, where you start seeing some of the areas that have some of the gulches, like Waikani Gulch has been mapped as inundation further inland. Koakoa here, right uphill of Pulalu, and you can see Pulalu Valley all the way halfway up the valley is inundation zone there, right? As is Honokani Nui, it's not marked in all these other valleys, but you can probably bet that they also should have little zones as well, right? Any valley here, unless you're hanging up above the cliff, should be at risk of some inundation, right? Some of these are actually fairly steep rises, right? So, but Waimanu has a big, wide area, and it doesn't have anything marked in there. Imagine it probably should, considering here's what Waipio looks like right off to the side of it, right over here. So quite a bit of an inundation zone there. We're missing some stuff in Hamakua. Maybe it's just too much cliffs and the little gullies don't show up in the map. Lapahoihoi is a zone of that disaster in 46 with a school right on a point. Got hit by the tsunami right there. All lowland down there. And otherwise, we'll come down to Hakalau Gulch, Kole Kole, and eventually all the way back to Hilo. And so in Hilo, see all of Bayfront Park, all of Waiakea Pond, all the way back to Kinoole Street is the uphill side of most of the downtown area. And on the other side, this is the airport runway right here. So the airport is on the other side right there. Hualani, Leilani Street, there's a boundary, right? So all of Keaukaha is in that inundation zone all through there and around the corner as well, right? So coming down across HPP, Maku'u, Kapoho, you can see they're using some old data, old shoreline data set there. Don't have a new land from 2018, nor from the 1990s, in fact, nor from the 2000s. Well, through here, some little variations, but you can see that there's a strip of inundation all around, bringing us all the way back to the national park, south side here. So that's a little bit of awareness of if you're traveling around the island, you might be any one of these different places, right? That's kind of what you keep in mind of where you are, the landscape, how quickly the ground rises, where you might get caught, where you would have to evacuate to if needed. So that is how we'll conclude our little tsunami awareness segment here today. And with that, we'll switch to community. And I will just sum up that the national park is having events. Right? So the one coming up this coming week is Tuesday, April 16th, 7 p.m. Meet artist in residence Rick San Nicolas. And this is something that we will be trying to stream. We believe we're doing this on Facebook only. Is that right, Dane? So Facebook only for these cultural programs. If you're interested in that and you're looking for us, come find us on Facebook for that one. Right, and we'll keep the.
I think we might also start doing them on Instagram as well. But our Instagram is very new, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what we're putting on there. So check it out and leave some comments, and you might be able to help us decide on what direction to exactly take it in.
Yeah, and by the way, if you don't mind, we're at @hvery_org on Instagram, and just show up and give us a follow so we can get our numbers up, and that gives us more use of our account as well. So appreciate that. So and then there's National Park Week coming up April 20th and on from there as well. So we'll cover that in weeks to come, but coming up just Tuesday, April 16th for National Park events. There is still construction ongoing at the park. We summarize it, nothing new to announce this week, but still Wikahuna parking area, Critter and Drive west near the entrance, the visitor center parking area, the tree molds closure, the park entrance right lane, and the restrooms at Wikahuna, all suffering impacts of construction here. Thought we could just see the loop from the K2 camera that's up atop the old Jagger Museum Tower. And you can see that they've begun dismantling this building from the inside. Don't really see much of the roof here yet, but eventually we'll start seeing some pieces of this building disappear from view here. That's begun here at the lower sections. So yeah, that's the first part of our update. And I'll pass it over to you, Dane, to say some thank yous and put our sponsors up here on the screen.
Yeah. And first, I'd like to thank everybody that tuned in today. We really rely on viewers like you to help get this information out there. The likes, the subscriptions, the shares, all that stuff really does help get the algorithms to help get it in front of more eyes instead of the clickbaity stuff that's all over YouTube. So if you appreciate this type of content, appreciate that. We also do take donations on hvery.org/donate. And these are tax deductible donations. So we encourage you guys to, if you want to support us, that is the best way to support us, especially since nobody takes any cut of that other than the payment processors, but we get the most money out of your donations that way. So yeah, we also would like to shout out the Puna Strong and Kilauea Recovery Grants by the County of Hawaii, giving us the funding to help keep this and all of our other programs going. Yeah, I didn't get any questions really set up, but I did get a donation that I wanted to highlight from Scotch Ed. It's a $20. Mahalo, Jerry. Can I poke Kilauea tonight? Is the question. The long range poking. There was something from Yvonne that I could highlight potentially.
Yeah.
So she's been out hiking around. So something weird again on my hike out to Ka'u when I passed Pu'ukohi. It was extremely smelly out there with lots of volcanic gases. It was the first I smelled it out there. And then a lot of steam rose from the old 1974 flow. The same thing happened before October intrusion. Tuesday was no rain out there. Even the days before, there was none, which would explain it. And the dew point was at 52 degrees, and it was cold outside. It was cold outside at 59 degrees, Kona wind conditions, muggy weather. Yeah, just interesting observations out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something where we do believe there is a lot of magma intruded down there, and we saw the USGS report. What was it? I forget how many millions of cubic meters. Something maybe 40 is what I want to say. It was like some huge amount of magma that got down in there. So just like we're still seeing it degassing up at the summit, where it popped out of Halemau'amau, it would not be surprising to see it degassing some way out through all those cracks as well. The gas can work its way through rock that the magma cannot, right? This is what can happen. But it's interesting as well, right? Maybe there is heat as well, heating up that flow. Yeah, that's an interesting observation too. I appreciate that report from the field, Yvonne. Yeah, I can't wait to get out there myself. And yeah, Yvonne does have on Tracker a fuller account of her experience out in Kau. So check that out as well if you're into it.
All right. And I think we will do the wrap up of everything and the donation drive and all that at the end, if that's cool.
Yeah, as you wish. Okay, so let me next just do a recap of this 1868 earthquakes and eruption sequence, right? Is what I'd like to do, because it was pretty lengthy and it's hard to keep track when it lasts that long, I know. So let's try a short version of it here. So let me find the right slide, which is there. All right. So here is our interpreted sequence of events in 1868 between March 27th and April 11th. And there was quite a lot that happened on the south part of Hawaii Island, including both Mauna Loa and Kilauea volcanoes. And there were 5 major steps of this sequence that I thought I would highlight for you guys here. It begins on March 27th, 28th with a Mauna Loa summit eruption and southwest rift intrusion there. Then magnitude 7.1 leads to magnitude 7.9 on April 2nd there. That affects the entire south part of the island, including Kilauea and Mauna Loa's south flank jointly. There are landslides that occur in multiple places, including the mud flow at Wood Valley. There is a tsunami island-wide with many deaths, especially on the south side. Deaths from rock falls as well. Then following that earthquake, April 2nd, there's an eruption in Kilauea at Kilauea summit. Halemau'amau begins to drain. Following that, a couple of days later, April 4th, there's a magnitude 7 earthquake on Kilauea's south flank. Not sure exactly where, but somewhere in there. And it's believed that that leads to a southwest rift eruption of Kilauea out in here. And Kilauea summit begins to collapse then. Finally, the volcano that began at Mauna Loa, magma is still intruding down the southwest rift this entire time. It arrives down to a lower elevation around Kahuku. And there's a southwest rift eruption at Mauna Loa at Kahuku, and Mauna Loa summit then collapses. So for those keeping count, in red are 4 eruptions, right? In this pink are our 3 big earthquakes. And it's maroon color. Those are some collapses happening there, with a tsunami and landslides thrown in as well for good measure. So in slightly more detail, the eruption at Mauna Loa summit, March 27th, was very short. People reported seeing the puff of fume in the morning from the whaling ships anchored at Kīlauea, but they did not see glow in the evening. So it had stopped flowing and was not even glowing by that point in time. The summit in slightly southwest. The eruption ends, and they note earthquakes happening on March 28th, all through Kau, peaking with a 7.1 that afternoon, which seems to allow more magma to continue intruding in the southwest rift. The intrusion keeps propagating down the rift further and further. Right? As it does so, it puts pressure on the rift to later set off that magnitude 7.9, which comes after the 7.1. So that's our number 2. There it is. The Great Kau earthquake, it's sometimes called. Our 7.9 is an estimate based on this entire area rupturing at once and moving all at the same time. This comes from the damage reports, the intensity of damage at all these places around here to come to this estimate of 7.9. The casualties are really hard to track down exactly because there's a lot of different accounts coming through, and there are multiple events happening, all overlapping. And the newspaper only came out once a week back then, right? No pictures, all text. So some stuff gets muddled together a little bit there. So I did see one account of 20 people dying of the earthquake at Paliuka and Kau, and another, I want to say 13 beyond that, dying of tsunami there. So they actually split them out in that one location. In one paper article, there's a report of over in Onamea of a rock fall hitting 2 people. One for sure died. One was being attended to. I'm not sure I ever saw the final report on that person, but somewhere in that range of maybe 22-ish people died of the earthquake. 46 houses, all the churches were all made of stone, all destroyed. Many of the smokestacks of all the sugar mills all fell over. Lots of damage all across Hilo. There's a landslides happening. The big one was at Wood Valley, Kilauea, which they call it a mud flow because it seems like there was some groundwater trapped in the mountain. And when the earthquake caused a landslide, that waterlogged ground was relieved to the point where they saw water pouring out of a crack for days afterwards. And then eventually it died out, all the mud hardened, and it was all just red earth. It was originally misconstrued as an eruption because it was a red fluid moving down the mountain. But in fact, it was cold. It was not lava flow, but perhaps they might have described it as Pele as well. That landslide, 31 casualties, 10 houses, and many livestock buried. They described the flow moving so fast, it caught up to goats who were galloping away and overtook the goats. So massive event. There's another 31 there to add to our 22-ish. And then the tsunami and the coastal subsidence, the ground drops across all South Hawaii. The land is just reshaped. Areas that used to be above ground are now flooded. Places that were beaches are now totally underwater and are become reefs, and everything changes right then. Some of the Hawaiian villages along the shore are completely wiped out, never to be rebuilt. Perhaps 47 casualties is hard to split them out, right? You've seen some of the numbers like 81, but they often lump all these together, right? And it's hard to separate earthquake happening nearby, 7.9, stuff falling on you. If you're by the ocean, and did you die at a house falling on you or some timber falling on you? Or was it the water coming in seconds, minutes afterwards? Hard to tell, and it's understandable why some of these accounts are joint casualties there. So that's April 2nd. It seems like there is some ambiguity in the details here, but from April 2nd to the 4th, earthquakes reported across Kilauea, kept shaking, and lava is excited in Halema'uma'u, certainly changing in vigor, and by some accounts beginning to drain and coalesce into only certain pits of lava within that summit crater. On April 2nd, perhaps this seems to be the most likely date to me. Eruption of Kilauea Iki eruption, likely caused by the earthquake. Analysis of chemistries of the lavas of this eruption showed it was old lava basically squeezed up. So it's probably just that earthquake shock causing a very short few hours eruption. They saw a glow in Kilauea Iki crater on that day. And the lava that began draining out in that time within 3 days is no longer visible at the summit of Kilauea altogether. Kilauea is completely dark at that point in time. Right? So April 4th, very likely magnitude 7 Kilauea South Flank earthquake, noted in a paper at the time, Pacific Commercial Advertiser on May 9th, 1868, noted in the USGS First Paper 1806 as well, that there was a second earthquake resulting in a second tsunami as well, measured in Hilo. There it is. So on April 4th, second earth, or really the third earthquake, tsunami, and southwest rift eruption. Now, there was accounts that there was some cracking opening up in the southwest rift area of Kilauea during that 7.9 earthquake, but a lot of these reports come from someone that was visiting. People were visiting after the fact, and those two earthquakes 2 days apart. It's hard to tell which damage came from which earthquake, unless you happen to catch accounts that were put out before the big earthquake on April 2nd. So it gets really, really muddled in there. This eruption could have happened on April 2nd as well, but perhaps it happened on April 4th, which would make more sense if all this stuff is moving. That way you don't have to try to spread apart to cause an eruption right through there afterwards. You can have your magnitude 7 on April 4th do the work of doing that and cause a little southwest rift eruption. Sometime doing all of this, Kilauea summit begins to collapse. In the end, it's about a quarter of the volume of 2018, but that still amounts to about half the depth, right? You're talking about somewhere in the range of 600 or 800 feet down collapse of a smaller area, but still a very significant collapse at Kilauea summit. And on Kilauea, which is closer to Hilo, people in Hilo report earthquakes tailing off where they finally can sleep again on April 9th, right? Now I say in Hilo because the final part of the sequence is down here in the southwest rift of Mauna Loa at Kahuku, where on April 7th, the eruption begins at Kahuku, low in a southwest rift. It reaches the ocean in 3.5 hours, very quickly. Sometime in that range, Mauna Loa summit is collapsing as well. By USGS presentations, we have heard that they believe this summit collapse was larger than Kilauea's 2018 collapse, right there. We don't know when it began exactly, but as we have 2018 as a guide, we saw that once once the lava stops coming out of the ground, the summit stops collapsing as well. So to me, since the eruption ends April 11th, likely the collapse ends April 11th as well, and maybe it begins as far back as April 2nd when you had the 7.9 earthquake, but it could have been even earlier to March 28th when it was the first 7.1 earthquake as well. In that southwest eruption, no deaths. Some people were actually trapped by the flow, but they all survived. Some cattle did not. Some cattle did survive and were rescued out from little kipukas, islands of untouched land surrounded by lava after the fact. Still 37 houses, 1.5 miles of the public roads, and over 100 livestock were the casualties of that eruption. And in Kau, a couple of days later, closer to that eruption site, earthquakes tail off after the eruption actually ends April 11th. And that is the full sequence of 1868. So pulling back to the beginning to summarize, this is why we talk about what happens historically. This is what we as communities in Hawaii Island need to be ready for, a worst case scenario, right? Where you actually have Mauna Loa summit eruption, intrusion in the southwest rift, sets off a 7.1 earthquake, continues earthquaking for 4 days, sets off a 7.9 earthquake as intrusion propagates down the southwest rift, sets off multiple landslides, including a mud flow that kills many people, tsunami kills many more people. At the same time, causes Kilauea to erupt, a Kilauea Iki, causes the lava to agitate and Hale and begin to drain. Not noted here, but perhaps fitting into the story, an intrusion into Kilauea southwest rift as magma is draining somewhere might then lead to a magnitude 7 Kilauea south flank earthquake, southwest rift eruption of Kilauea, and Kilauea summit collapse as a result of all of that. And finally, the end sequence, Mauna Loa southwest rift and Mauna Loa summit collapse. All of this happening within 16 days. That is our worst case scenario, what we should prepare for. And that is 1868. So moving on from that, that was a lot shorter than the last time, but went into less detail hopefully as well. We will now transition to a shorter cut of geologist Drew Downs after dark in the park, January 23rd, earlier this year. A brief history of Kilauea's southwest rift zone. Unless there's anything you want to jump in before we turn to that? we'll do our Volcano Awareness Month presentation here
I think
next.
we're good. Go ahead and fire it up and let's get it going.
All right, here it goes then.
So I'm going to be talking about the southwest rift zone of Kilauea Volcano. You can see here just some of the varied landforms of the southwest rift zone. Madam Pele, as this was called by Jagger, is one of these hornitos that's in the southwest rift zone. This is one of the lava plastered cones. So this is an old scoria cone that the recent eruption in 1823, not so recent to us, but in geologic time quite recent, actually moved so quickly it flowed up and over the top of part of this cone. And then you can just see some of the Pohoihoi and unvegetated landscape out here in the southern part of the southwest rift zone. So it's a very varied geologic setting with a lot of different interesting features. And we're going to mostly be touching on the last 200 years of history, even though the southwest rift zone itself has lavas at the surface that are exposed for thousands of years old. So here's just a simple map showing the eruptions from around 1790 to 2018. We've got 1823. We've got a couple pre-1823 eruptions. We've got Mauna Loa out on the Footprints Trail, so around 1919 and spanned into 1920. And then we've got two in the 70s, 1971 and 1974. So this is the upper part of the southwest rift zone. We're going to jump right in. So basically, if you see brown out here, that means it's old. We're going to focus on these black young things. So this dark black one here is 1971. This one over here is 1974. This is Mauna Loa shield right here. But everything else in brown out here is old. It's pre-1500. Now, one of the things you might see up here is kind of this softer brown color. And those are explosive tephras. We don't really have a good idea of the timing, but we do know from lava flows that sit on top of these tephras, there were several eruptions that took place. Two of these were in the southwest rift zone down here, the Kīlauea Hills and the Kamaka'ia Hills. So you can see there I put up the label. That's this light grayish color is the Kīlauea Hills. And then this kind of darker blackish grayish color is the Kamaka'ia Hills. So these eruptions occurred really quickly after the 1800s started and the middle part of the southwest rift zone. There's not any stories that are related to these eruptions. There's not a whole lot that's known. If you've ever been out to Uekahuna Bluff, where the old Jagger Museum is, the old HVO is, and walked out as far as you can go where the fence makes that right angle and looked out, you'll probably see these three hills off in the distance. Those are the Kamaka'ia Hills. So that's a line of vents, and this is a closer up picture. Unfortunately, I don't really have a picture of the Kīlauea Hills. They're really low hills, so take a grain of salt when people call them hills. But the Kamaka'ia Hills are a nice landmarker out there. They're very big hills. They're very prominent. You can see them from down near Pahala. You can see them from up here at the summit. And the only thing we really know about them, as far as their timing goes, is they happened after the 1790 eruption, but before the 1823 eruption. So let's go ahead and move on. This is what I think is one of the most interesting eruptions from Kilauea, if not one of the most interesting eruptions in the world, and that's the 1823 eruption from the lower part of the southwest rift zone. So I'll just throw up a couple labels there. It starts here at where my pointer is, and the lava flow came down in this direction and in this direction. And this was one of the first eruptions that was visited by missionaries as they were making their way around the island. So William Ellis and his missionary expedition had come to Hawaii, and as they were making their way around the island, you can see the arrows kind of where they were making their way through, and they were told a story of shaking and what sounded like an eruption from this feature that's now labeled the Great Crack. This is the Great Crack. A 6-mile-long continuous crack that's anywhere from 10 to 20 yards wide and just as deep throughout most of its extent. You can see here, these are photos from Harold Stearns on one of his expeditions out there in the 1920s. And this is what the lava actually erupted out of. And based on walking along, I've walked from the very northern tip almost all the way down to the ocean. It looks like lava was welling out of this entire portion of the crack. There's no cones like in 2018. Fissure 8 built this giant cone up. There's no cones along this crack. It looks like lava just welled up and came out of this crack and flowed across the landscape. In fact, it's a particularly thin lava flow. In fact, here's what Ellis wrote after he'd seen it, that our guide told us that 2 large chasms. Now, I don't know where he gets the 2 large chasms from. I've walked all over out here and only ever seen one, but formed about 11 months ago. There was nothing had been visible till 2 moons back, and as you can read through, but about 3 weeks ago, a small flaming issued from the apertures and quantities of smoking lava all around. And when he went out there, he claimed it was still smoking and he could see fire down in the pit. There's even stories that there was a fishing village down near the coast and some of the canoes had been washed out to sea during this eruption, as he had related to him by his guides. Now, this eruption is particularly thin. For those who have seen the 2018 eruption or Pu'u'o or Mauna Ulu, you know that some of these eruptions can build up channels, they build up levees, and they can be quite thick. Some of them look like they're 50 feet or more thick. This usually has about a maximum thickness of 3 feet throughout most of its flow field. It's an extensive flow. It covers a lot of ground out there. It's all about 3 feet. These features down here are the lava plastered cones. So these are down in the lower part of the southwest rift zone. And you can see here, it's got lava that's run up and over it in several spots. So in this case, that's about 17 meters high. So that cone is over 50 feet high and had lava run up and over the side. That same feature you can see here, this is the same cone with its 17-meter height, 50 feet in the background. This is about 10 meters. So we're looking at about 30 feet high for that lava to flow up and over. Now, normal lava flow models do not work for this type of eruption. Most lava flow models want to build a channel and spread out across the landscape as things overtop the channel and not. So we've had to get creative to have a lava flow this thin be modeled and try and get them to run over the lava plastered cones here. And you can see the times at the top up there as it's running. And we had to have it run at over 10 meters a second, which is about 22 miles an hour across the landscape to get up and over that lava flow and keep its almost 3-foot thickness. So this lava flow may have been in place in a matter of hours or days. 1868 was a kind of an interesting year for Hawaii. So Mauna Loa itself had a big eruption. It had a summit eruption, and then it had its own southwest rift zone eruption that made it to the coast very rapidly. But associated with this eruption, there's also a 7.9 magnitude earthquake. So the largest earthquake ever kind of felt on the island of Hawaii that collapsed buildings. There was a tsunami associated with it. There was a mud flow that was also associated in Wood Valley and buried houses and people. There was an eruption in 1868 that happened at the summit. It's now known that it was Kilauea Iki, but the summit's not the only part of the story. It also erupted in the southwest rift zone, and it might actually be hard to see the colors there, but there is orange there, because the 1868 lavas in the southwest rift zone are tiny. You can see here, this pad of lava right here is the biggest one. There's actually 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This biggest one is probably 200 by 300 yards across. You'd be hard-pressed to have an eruption of this size last more than an hour. Now we're going to move on to one of the longer-lived eruptions that has been witnessed in the southwest rift zone, and that's Mauna Iki, which started in 1919. It went for 8 months and finished in 1920. So this is the Mauna Iki shield. This black part is its A'a lava flow, and then you can see this gray part down here is the Pahoehoe portion of this lava flow. This is actually from 1917, but it's kind of the same long-lived summit lava lake that was occurring at the time. With our first stage, that lake's starting to drain, and it's starting to move downrift, the magma. And as it's doing that, it's cracking. It's creating all these cracks. You can actually see someone sitting right there. And you know, they were watching this progression every day of these cracks going further and further down the southwest rift zone. Some of these cracks even had lava that was visible down them. Now, I don't know if anyone can see this, but that's a little closer than I'd want to sit in a crack that's got lava in it. But, you know, to each their own. And this is just a brief kind of summary of, you know, the 9 days of this dike going down at about cracks commencing about 0.5 kilometers per day as they're making their way down the rift. And you can see here this little diagram of, you know, lava-filled fissures and eventually fissures that produced lava flows. So you can see the ones here that eventually produced lava flows. The main Mauna Loa shield would be right around in here, but the cracks went further down. And there's actually lava that welled out of the ground in a number of spots, not just at the main shield from Mauna Loa. So this is kind of a colored map and an aerial photo with outlines of what the eruption stages look like. So you've got the yellow here, which is stage 2A. So that's the beginning of our eruption at the Mauna Loa shield. But you can see here, there's another tiny shield down here, this down rift shield. There's another in here. There's actually a couple really, really tiny ones that are too small to show up there where they had these lava-filled cracks and just little spurts of lava came out. That fed this flow in orange here. Then, after that was finished, the main Mauna Loa shield in red started to form, and eventually tubed overflows fed this Pahoehoe field that's in purple right there. So if we go on, here's the very beginning of the eruption as the U.S. Monthly Bulletin got a photo of. This is one of those downshield vents, so right here would have been the vent area and built a little bit of a shield here. The main Mauna Loa shield would be back up in this direction. And you can see here just a tracking of how fast the lava was flowing. So in the first couple days there, it was actually flowing quite quick at 5.6 kilometers per day, but it soon slowed quite dramatically. And here is another photo of that Jagger took at the time, as well as a photo that Scott Rowland ended up taking later of a similar location. So you can see here, this is the channel, which was cold and dry, and they've colored in this orangish color to say, oh, well, that was still hot and flowing at the time. And then stage 3 is the main building of the Mauna Loa shield, which there are some outbreaks here, but a lot of this was, and toothpaste here, but a lot of this was Pahoehoe flows that eventually were fed downrift. So here's the main Mauna Loa shield here. Actually, most of it's back here. And you can see the rift zone here. And already we've got a teaser for our next eruption, 1971, which cuts across part of the shield in several places. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to get to our 1971 eruption. This occurred in September. It started on September 24th. It lasted for a couple days through September 9th. It actually started in the summit up here, and unfortunately this didn't get colored. This little portion here and some of this coming down here are part of the 1971 eruption, but it went straight down the rift zone and had several very long fissures that were feeding this eruption through a couple days. So it started at the summit. It eventually migrated down rift. It's this dark brown elongated patch here. And then there's 2 patches here that cover the Mauna Loa shield that it cut through and erupted through. So how did this eruption started? Well, on September 24th, 80-meter high fountains started at about 7:20 p.m. on the Caldera floor. They were kind of between the main Halema'uma'u and the southwest crater floor, with these spreading over parts of the crater floor. Eventually, by 8:59 p.m., these fountains had made it out of the caldera, up on the southwest rift zone, and extended for about 1 kilometer. And anyone who's ever been on the road that goes around the summit before it was closed down will notice that there's some very young lava flows that you used to drive by. Well, those ended up having fissures that cut the road before they came through and repaired it. And this is one of those fissures right there that ended up cutting and burying the road. So these fountains had ended by about midnight. Light activity remained, but by the morning, the crater floor, Halema'uma'u, had dropped by 45 meters. So, consider that about 45 yards to a depth of about 100 meters. That was just the first night. It wasn't over with, because by 9:45 a.m. the next day, new fountains had broken out 5 kilometers down rift. And these fountains were kind of sporadic. They weren't super high. There was anywhere from 5 fountains going at the same time over an 8-kilometer long stretch, but usually only 1 to 2 were going. But you can see here an aerial view of one of these long fissures that was being fed and erupting at this time. That eventually died out, and we come to the most recent eruption in the Southwest Rift Zone. Some people would quibble with me that the Southwest Rift Zone is actually here and not over here, but it is definitely outside the caldera, and it is on the southwest side of the volcano. And this is the December 1974 eruption. So the fissures are up here, and this eruption only lasted about 6 hours, and it made a 12-kilometer long flow down in this direction. And this is what it looked like. It started at about 2:55 a.m. from a fissure that opened about 2.5 kilometers south of Halema'uma'u. So eventually these fissures spread to be over 3 kilometers in length with fountains that were reaching over 100 meters high, so over 100 yards high, or around 300 feet in height. But it didn't last very long. The eruption had already started to die down by 5:30 in the morning, and by 8:50, less than 6 hours later, this eruption had ended, producing a 12-kilometer long lava flow. And that's our most recent eruption in the Southwest Rift Zone. So what's next? Well, the Southwest Rift Zone is not dead just because it hasn't erupted in a while. It will have eruptions again in the future. Recently, we have had a lot of earthquakes here in the Southwest Rift Zone. Now, if you're expecting me to give you a time and a date to go out and watch, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because all I can tell you is the Southwest Rift Zone will erupt again. I cannot tell you when or where. I can tell you these shallow earthquakes are likely due to magma moving in the rift zone, but where an eruption would pop out and when, no one right now can say. And with that, I thank you all for coming out on such a lovely night, and see what questions you have. So the question was, the 1823 eruption was very thin, seemed to move very quickly, had a low viscosity, and what could explain that? We've got chemistry on the samples which look like typical Kilauea chemistry, so we can calculate temperatures from those. It actually has the same temperature as most eruptions from Kilauea. So it wasn't hotter, which is interesting because we thought it would be. We're still playing around with a couple ideas, but we don't actually know why it was so much quicker or in place rapidly than other lava flows. 1974 tends to have the same appearance to it. It's actually 1974 is a very thin lava flow, and it flowed 12 kilometers in only 6 hours. That's pretty quick. It also doesn't have an elevated temperature or anything special about its rheology. So the rheology is, what makes it flow, what makes up the lava that might make it sticky. We actually don't have a good idea on why it was in place that quickly.
All right, that was our condensed version of Drew Down's presentation on the Southwest Rift. So some interesting stuff there. Recap of that sequence. He had a lot more in his full talk. I see some chat here in our chat that there's a lot more in a full talk. Yeah, absolutely. Try to kind of make a version where it was focused more on just what the Southwest Rift eruptions actually were down there. Keep it all in one place for that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
some interesting things. Yeah, I mean, I didn't go into the full 1868 sequence, but there's still some ambiguity there as far as what he was describing, what dates things are happening. So it just goes to show how that's still being sorted out. One thing that when I heard him say that the account talked about two different rifts, I didn't imagine them side by side. I imagined them one and another with a little gap in between, like that, like one and another. Like maybe there was just two, and at some point the thing kept opening and it just joined together. Maybe became one. That's the best I can come up with, but you can imagine that that great crack area probably has had more adjustment and movement ever since then, and that was probably just the very first step of it.
The one that got me at the time, and it still gets me on the rewatch, is the 1823 stuff. I just don't understand how that's possible. The speed in which that they're saying, and then they're saying, oh, with the viscosity and the temperature wasn't really all that different. I look at the terrain, and I think back to 2018. I'm just like, how? And I'm also trying to figure out. I was trying to look exactly where. I was pulling up the elevation profile of the area, and I was trying to figure out exactly where that cone was, just to figure out what it was like beside it. Did you have like a 200-foot drop going right, as a ramp to get speed or something? Just trying to figure out like what could, because it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't pass like the smell test essentially for me, and I'm just like, I don't know what happened, but I'm like, that speed, I just don't know. There's something off about it to me. And I don't understand. I'm wondering if you've seen it yourself out there and what your thoughts are on that thing.
Yeah, I haven't, but I mean, part of the discussion that's the likely missing component there is how much gas is in there, right? And so I haven't seen how gassy that flow actually is, but the fact that you saw it all come out in 6 hours in 74 and maybe similar time in 1823, I mean, that means that probably you all only had gas phase, like you didn't have any later stage where it was gas poured. That's, it was like almost like one big burp that just brought all the gassy lava with it. That's the only way that I can imagine it, being like that. There's one other example that used to be a teaching example all the time. It's hard to get to and stuff now, but it's down by Kīlauea on the south side of Kilauea Caldera. We used to always go with students, and there's a place where the lava had erupted from a fissure, like right by the fissure, comes out, hits a gully, hits down this gully, and actually hits a bank. It banks up, and you can see it go uphill on the bank and
I think
come
you
back
showed me
down
this. Yeah.
into the crater right there. Yeah, so
Right.
have a students measure it. The viscosity, you can actually calculate the speed of the flow, and it's it's about like 18, 20, 22 miles, somewhere in that range of speed. We saw in 2018 it was what, 18, right? So
In an established channel, yeah. The distal tip, though,
channel,
yeah,
where the gas is held in. Yeah, so I mean, that's the best I could approximate without knowing more about it, right?
Without really going into it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions, as far as the 1868 lava on the Southwest Rift. I was looking for any chemistry of that lava. I'm sure they probably had, Drew sounds like he's been out there and collected samples, so I'm kind of curious what are those samples like? Was that old magma? Was that magma that came in? That might help us untangle. Was it April 2nd or 4th that thing actually happened? Right? Because was it something that squeezed up that was old, like Kilauea, right, where it might have been a pressure of like magma that was in there before, or was there actually a fresh intrusion of magma from a summit that went down the rift zone? And that's why the summit drained, and then you have fresh magma down there and not some older stuff. Really interesting. That's kind of one of the missing pieces. We'll see that'll come out someday, I'm sure, but we have a machinery to do the analysis on an island now, and it's just a matter of bringing the samples and writing it up and just where are they in that process, right? So yeah, that's another one I'd be really interested in to find out more about. I still am curious about that. Those earthquakes, how they all fit together, still gets to me a little bit, but yeah, in the end,
it's just
the
so
little
hard
details don't matter as much as the fact that it all happened in such a short time, and if we're not ready for that, then we may not be ready for in time, right? It's true that it happens so infrequently that not many of us will get it, but it has been over 150 years now. It could happen again.
Yep. You can get something, the same scale type of thing, but it's more Mauna Loa or something. You're like, even the old eruptions that weren't devastating back when they happened, if you rerun them today, there's a lot of residential areas in those spots, and it would be pretty devastating. So it's, it's an evolutionary process, right? The island changes, the people change, but also the science changes and gets more technical, and we get more precision instruments, and that allows us to see more earthquakes. So it's even when you're measuring against now versus 20, 30 years ago, it's kind of apples and oranges when you're looking at this, even the same data sets, almost not exactly apples and oranges, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. One thing I was going to bring up about this whole 1868 thing and what kind of earthquakes are happening. We've seen earthquakes pop up recently where we're like, okay, like that's strange. Like there was an earthquake that got put out as a 5 point something, and we're like, okay, no, actually, it's calling it a 4.9 and a 4.5. There was 2 earthquakes back to back, and they're each small. Like how would you know unless you had a seismometer on the ground that it was one giant 7.9, or it was like a 7.8 and then 3 7s in a row, like southwest flank Kilauea, south flank Kilauea, south. Who knows? Like, you have no way of telling from just the reports. You just know that everything was shaking for a long time, all around the same time. People are like, like it was at 1:32. But I think what you keep reading is they'll go into town and be like, oh, by my clock it was like 1:32. But by the clocks in town it was like a 1:50. Everyone's got their own time keeping. So like the times are even like harder sometimes. Like, are we all using the same time? So it gets really tricky. Really tricky. If you don't have any damage inspection until like 1 week later after both have happened, or 2 or 3, who knows how many earthquakes, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 earthquakes could have happened for like, I can imagine, right? There's such a huge area, right? And you
might
call
be
it
able
all
to,
one big earthquake, or you know what I mean?
yeah, you might be able to answer this. So say we did go through that type of sequence, the 1868 sequence, right? And we have that big devastating earthquake that happens. A lot of networks offline, a lot of communication channels get taken offline. Does the seismic network survive such a thing, such that we have live data? Like even in internal USGS, not public.
Yeah.
That would still be okay. That wouldn't chance of network issues
it depends.
impacting.
Yeah, you probably would have issues, right? Because so the signals can be sent in various different ways. The old tried and true way is by radio signal, right? So if the earthquake happens to shake, let's say your clamps aren't tight enough and your earthquake shakes your mast, so it goes from pointing this way to pointing that way, now you're going to have a data transmission issue to like where it's not actually getting from the instrument on a mountain to down observatory. There's always a backup on the instrument itself on site, but someone's going to go up there and then repoint the antenna back to where it's supposed to be and then download the data to catch it up. That's one thing that can happen, right? If some of the things use internet here or there, then they might be delayed as well. But similar kind of style, where if in a transmission issue, the data gets stored locally and then gets updated once it gets reconnected, kind of thing, right? Some of the stuff might even use a cell network, but different kinds of the cell network. Some of the stuff might use a regular network, some might use the emergency cell network that's privy to emergency managers. So it gets complicated in there, because the network is always changing and evolving. You have like old stuff and new stuff. I imagine that you probably have some impact, but it wouldn't be like everything goes down all at once.
Right. And even if it did type of thing, like say we did have a blackout of that, you would still have those seismic signals being seen through an Alaska Observatory, California, Japan. It would just take a while for them to get out and be able to, we'd know, but it would be minutes later. It'd be a little bit of a delay, even without our seismic here.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. I mean, it really depends what kind of damage you're talking about, right? But yeah, most, if we're excluding Carrington kind of events, then most likely your data is getting back to the mainland still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that was a good talk. I appreciate you taking a little, because I've been thinking about that since he said that and that talk a month or 2 months ago, 3 months ago now, where it's like, how did 1823 happen like that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, so maybe I would put it the 1868 sequence one last time up here since we've been talking about it and flashed up one last time here, and yeah, that's what we're all about here. HVRE, we're trying to improve our disaster preparedness, response, and recovery, right? By doing all this education about earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, whatever we can to make our communities stronger and more resilient here on Hawaii Island. So that's why we're doing all this. We appreciate all your support. We'll be back next week at our usual time. Doing anything else before we close it out here?
No, I think we just want to acknowledge everybody for our donation drive that just wrapped up.
Yeah, let's do that.
And we'll go ahead and get Lou on here, and he can help us out, talk about some of the stuff that we've been doing. And hey, Lou, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Reliving the Drew Downs presentation.
Right.
That was one of those that I, behind the camera, sometimes I don't always get totally engaged because I'm working on other things. But that was one I was pretty glued to, and he's a good guy to listen to. And I dropped the link in there if anybody wants to watch the whole version of it. All the videos that we did during Volcano Awareness Month is in that spot from the link right there that I dropped. Check him out. He's a good presenter. And I have to say this about the USGS lineup here. All their geologists are really good presenters with a lot of information. It's sometimes unfortunate they set it at a parameter of 1 hour to talk because they could just keep going and going.
Right. Yeah, there is something too. I would love to have like some of these guys on a long form podcast where we could just chat with them for hours type of thing and just bring up all these different, less structured. But I got you. They have some talent up there now, and that's different from maybe back in the day when we talked about it. It's like, oh, they maybe don't have the greatest communication with the public, but I think that's an area that they have been improving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing I can add is the talks at the park. They're really tailoring them to visitors who are here for the first time and they don't have any background whatsoever. And that's part of why I do those edits on the talks, is because a lot of it's okay. Here's where the summit is. Here's where the rift zones are. Here's the background that for those of you guys watching our stream is already understood, right, for most of you. So repeat that as well too, but that's part of it as well, is that they're always trying to start off with the lowest common denominator. If someone doesn't know anything, they just got here yesterday, let's start from scratch. Mm-hmm. So that's the format of what they put out now, and hopefully, it would be great to collaborate more in the future and be able to ask some more dialed in questions and have discussions on those. Yeah. So
I watched new visitors to the park go in with really very little understanding of volcanoes. And I listen to the chatter as they walk out. And there are a lot of people that I hear are a lot more interested in volcanoes and what goes on here after one of those presentations. I can see it in their eyes. The engagement of the crowd. It's interesting to follow.
That's why we do them here too. It's exactly that. Same education, engagement, and that's it. So I'll let you guys do your thank yous here. And
get on to the donation drive. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so Dane, we wrapped up the donation drive, didn't we?
Yes, sir.
All right. We had one more final push this weekend, which put us over the top of 5,000. I'm going to put the video on here, see if it comes up. There it is. There it is. And I got all the new names. We even had another $15.
Tom, Larry, Brian, Pat, Tiggy, Gustav, Kim, Momo, Jerome, Robert, Gina, Jana, Tim, Harry, Kimberly, Marley, Dee, Sharon.
I set you up on that one.
You got to give me a time in.
I got to slow it down. We had a lot of names.
Clock going.
$5,324. Thank you so much to everybody that helped us out on this donation drive. Seeing that and bringing us to that level is huge for us. The personal funding that goes on from you all really does help bridge the gap, and the time between grants that come in. It makes a huge difference. Every $1, every $5 that comes in, we truly appreciate it. So thank you all for donating. There is always time to donate after the donation drive. That was just a specific drive that we put together, but the hvery.org/donate is always available at any time that you're feeling generous. You can visit us there and make a donation.
Yeah, give me a shot at those names sometime, huh? I'm the one that talks.
Oh, there we go. That's a good idea.
He just surprises us. He's just like, there's the going names. Get it going. Start reading.
We appreciate all you guys, whether your name or not. We love all you guys. Mahalo.
We really do. Thank you. And especially, the ones that started off at the beginning of the donation drive, you know our story, you know what we're doing to help kick us off, and is amazing, because sometimes these things take a little bit of time to get some momentum, but you guys rallied up front and kept going through the entire month that we did this. So really do appreciate everything.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. All right. No questions for the second half that I saw. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. It's about our normal time now, about an hour and a half. About how we've been going. So yeah, I think that does it for me. And unless something happens, you never know. We don't really expect anything, but we will be back next Thursday, 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. That is our normal time slot for doing these updates and getting you guys this information.
Yeah, thanks, Dane, and thanks all you guys for supporting us, following along, and yeah, every week checking in and educating ourselves. And you guys are our army. When something like that were to happen, it's going to take more than just a couple of us. It's going to take our whole community to perpetuate that knowledge and preparedness. So we're all in it together. Really appreciate you guys and appreciate your support and your commitment to the journey we're taking here all together. So mahalo for that. All you guys who are watching us live, all you guys who are watching us on replay, mahalo all you guys. So until next week, from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, he is Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Hello, everybody.